Hello and welcome to this episode of Superhero Ethics. Today we're talking about the new Marvel movie Shang-Chi, and we're talking about that with Paul Hoppy and Will Freeland. All that and more right after this commercial break we have no control over. Welcome back. My name is Matthew. I'm your host, and I want to get just two quick pieces of business out of the way before I jump into this. First, for those of you who are also a subscriber to my Star Wars Universe podcast, that is on a bit of hiatus at the moment. All of my normal hosts have all decided to move to California or different parts of...
Or from California.
Yeah. Yeah. Let me redo that.
Your permanent guest, Paul, doesn't count.
Stop giving all this great content. Screw it. I'll just leave all that in. All of my normal hosts are either from or... Yeah. All of my normal hosts are either moving to or away from California at the moment, and so have understandably not been able to record on Star Wars. We will be starting on Rebels fairly soon. I'm probably going to get some kind of Star Wars content out this week or next about kind of just the state of Star Wars or diving into something else, but that podcast hasn't gone away, I promise. Second piece of quick business, the entire Stranded Panda network right now is doing a review contest. Basically, there's a raffle, and if you win, you can get a Oculus 2 or a Nintendo Switch. I've recently discovered the highly addictive game that is Fire Emblem Three Houses. So as my partner and I are fighting over who gets to use the Switch in our house, a second Switch sounds like a very good idea. Oculus Virtual Reality I've also heard is amazing. So if you want a chance to win either of these, you get to choose if you win. All you have to do is write a 5-star review for one of the podcasts on the Stranded Panda network. Obviously, I would love it if you wrote one for Star Wars Universe podcast or for this podcast, Superhero Ethics. And you can also write them, though, for MCU Cast, Animation Deliberation, the Book Club podcast, PandaVision, any of them. And even better, you can write them for multiple. Every review you write for a podcast, as long as it's 5-star, and, make it an actual review. Don't just say, I'm putting in this review so I can win. Say something good about the podcast, subscribe to the podcast, check it out. Great reason to check it out. If you write reviews for 3 of them, you have 3 entries into the raffle. If you write reviews for all of them, you have that many entries into the raffle. So definitely check it out. I always want reviews for this podcast and Star Wars Universe podcast anyway, so I always appreciate that. You can write a review even if you've done one before, but now you have an extra incentive. So if you do it any time during the month of September, you get entered into that raffle. So thank you all for that. Now those 2 pieces of business out of the way. Will and Paul, I am so glad we're getting together to talk about this movie, especially because we weren't sure if we were all going to see this movie. So how y'all doing today? How you feeling about the movie?
I'll let you go first, Paul.
Yeah, also write a 5-star review for Hype is My Superpower, even though you won't get an Oculus.
Yes. I was going to put that at the end, but yes, good point.
Yeah, how am I doing? That's a long answer. I loved the movie. I did manage to see it at my very first trip to a drive-in theater.
Okay, nice.
I was, it's... How am I doing?
Look, the movie's all about traditions in the past, so going into our own ancestors' traditions of the 1950s, I think, is an appropriate way to watch this movie.
Yeah, I actually got food from Monty's. It's a vegan diner right afterwards, so I felt like I was living in the 50s.
Nice.
Tales from my mom's childhood. So, I really enjoyed the movie. The experience of seeing it in a drive-in, I think, hindered some of the stuff, like some of the fight scenes, particularly the sort of darker ones, like the scaffolding one and the CGI fest at the end. But this was the Marvel movie that I was looking forward to. Actually, it's kind of like the first movie I've been looking forward to since like Jason Bourne. And like Jason Bourne hurt me, so I was very relieved to enjoy this movie a lot. I was looking forward to Endgame too. I shouldn't undersell that.
Mm-hmm. What about you, Will?
So personally, I'm doing pretty well. During the pandemic, they introduced they being like movie theaters introduced this whole thing where you can like rent out a whole theater for like $150 and bring up to 20 people. With you. So like theaters can start generating some sort of income and traffic again, but it's also, theaters usually hold a few hundred people. So it's socially distant and relatively responsible. So anyway, I did that for Shang-Chi among like a handful of other movies throughout the pandemic, and it was great and amazing and a lot of fun. I had a great time watching this movie. I really liked some of the decisions that were made for the adaptation of moving Shang-Chi from the comics to the big screen and the MCU. I was skeptical for a lot of it, or like leading up to it. I was wondering how they're going to do some things, what they're going to do, how they're going to make it fit, and I feel like they addressed most of my concerns, and it worked out pretty well.
Yeah. I think that makes a lot of sense. And that honestly is the first ethical question I wanted to dive into. We're not going to do a straight review of the movie. Obviously, this is the ethics podcast, although how we feel about the movie is a big part of that. And I want to give a spoiler warning kind of as part of this first topic, because the very question of should you go see this movie right now with all the pandemic concerns that are there right now. I also, all three of us took different precautions. In my case, I bought tickets for an 11 a.m. showing on a weekday. And kind of kept monitoring to see how many people had bought tickets. There would only wind up being 9 people in the theater with us, and we were able to sit like a number of rows away from everybody, masks on, all that stuff. And I'm glad I saw the movie. I respect very much that some people have not had the chance to see the movie, either because they don't feel safe doing something like that, or because there's some parts of the world where the movie is just not being shown, largely often because of pandemic precautions, or some places where the movie is just not being shown at all. Like China, which is a whole other story that we'll not get into. But so, spoiler warning, I thought a lot about could we talk about a lot of this movie without spoilers, because I really want to include people who haven't seen the movie yet. I don't think there really was a way to do that without making this podcast 3 hours long, which is just not something we can do, unfortunately, at this point. So there will be spoilers. I think there have been 1 or 2 already, but hopefully pretty mild ones. So if you've not seen the movie yet and you do want to, please, feel free to hit pause. This podcast episode will still be available in 5 or 6 weeks when it goes on Disney Plus. So I'm sorry we can't do that for everyone who hasn't seen it yet. But that's actually kind of my first question is, I went to see the movie because I felt like I needed to be able to talk about it with you all, and I didn't want to wait 6 weeks. But I admit I wasn't happy about it. And I am, on the one hand, I get why they wanted this movie to do as well as it should, and I wanted it to do well because it's the first Asian American superhero we've had, or first Asian superhero we've had in Marvel's cinematic universe, getting their own movie by any means. But I'm not feeling great about the fact that you had to go to a movie theater to see this, and I'm really wishing they'd put it on Disney Plus as well. What are your all thoughts on just this whole question of going to see a movie during the pandemic and everything like that?
Yeah, I mean, I've got a mix of sort of to each their own, and like, what are we doing as like human civilization collectively? Like, So without getting too deep into that, and that like, I kind of think coronavirus is just going to become endemic and human lifespans have just lost a year or two. And like feeling kind of filled with terrible sadness and rage, like for the last.
Sorry, I mean to laugh at that, but yeah, the way you phrase it is
pretty much for all my life, but more specifically for the last while. It's funny, but not funny, But I feel like Disney not having. I feel like releasing a movie now without having concurrent streaming, I think it's really bad. I don't think it should be the way movies are released anymore. And I don't think that's just because of the pandemic. Just like thinking about it, it's like, it's never only going to be like right now, there's a lot of people who might not want to see it because of whatever risks, but there's always going to be a good number of people who just can't go to a theater. Right. Yeah,
whether that's because of like their schedule or because of mental or physical disabilities that makes getting out of the house difficult. I mean, or like other like high levels of immunocompromise, things like that. Yeah, there's never going to be a time when everyone is going to have a best experience seeing it at the theater by any means.
And personally, I just feel like being able to see Black Widow at home when it came out was like, I would always like to have this option personally without even having any big other reasons, like health reasons. And so the fact that this was the only movie that I was like really looking forward to and that then it was going to have this like 45-day theatrical only release, which like, yeah, I do want the movie to do really well. As much as like I've got complaints about Disney as a company, I think the whole like, so they had Black Widow in July, right? When things were a certain level of bad, and it was released with concurrent streaming. And then now they have Shang-Chi without concurrent streaming, and things are substantially worse than they were in July. And, you know, there's the whole thing about like compensation, right? There's probably a lot fewer actors, or maybe none, or people involved in this movie. A lot fewer people have points in the movie than did like get a percentage of the box office, right? Than was true with Black Widow. So it's sort of like, oh, well, they're not screwing anyone this time. It's like, yeah, but they don't have an actor who's an executive producer on the film, you know, which usually comes with points. So it feels a little bit to me like, you know,
yeah.
But like, I really
this could have been the movie that they did concurrent.
Exactly. Where it's like, and you probably wouldn't have had, I mean, I don't know the details of anyone's contract, but I imagine that even though, you know, Simu Liu is like really popular in Canada, he's kind of just breaking through in you know, internationally, right? And in the United States.
Right.
And like, Tony Leung is like a legend of Hong Kong cinema, but I think this is his Hollywood debut, you know, which is insane to me because he's just amazing, and I want to see him in everything. But it just, I don't know, it feels like, I mean, I went through a process of like, yeah, I'm not going to see anything when it comes out, and I'm just going to completely shut myself off from like social media, or like I don't want to see any spoilers, to being like, well, I'm probably not going to be able to avoid spoilers, so I guess I'll see some, to like, I really want to see it. And I was like, well, you know, maybe we can go see it like on Tuesday morning at 11 a.m.,
right.
which is like roughly when we're recording this podcast. And so I was kind of leaning towards that plan. And then we got some horrible news that, you know, someone in our family has an illness and we're going to have to take them to the hospital, and we're going to be around them a lot. And like, now that the equation went from being a concern about my own risk to a concern about someone else's risk. And, you know, and that's the thing about this whole situation, is just that sort of how interconnected everything is, and how our own decisions aren't just what risks we're taking for ourselves, but they're always also risks that we're taking for people who are going to be around us. And then yesterday, or the day before, Lee was just like, oh, why don't we go to the drive-in? I was like, oh my goodness, the drive-in. Like, that's amazing, you know? And then I got the radio, and then she's like, yeah, I don't really want to go. And I'm like, what? So I went to the drive-in by myself.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think you raise so many of the good points here. And it's, again, I don't want to make this all about like the ethics of the industry right now. That could be a whole other podcast, but it feels very relevant here. Especially because I feel like right now there's two very separate issues that are unfortunately getting conflated a lot. One of which is it responsible to put movies in theaters, let alone putting them in theaters at all, but especially only in theaters? Mm-hmm. And then a second issue, which really should be separated, which is, you know, can you switch to Disney Plus? You know, can you switch to online release and in theaters in a way that is equitable for all these people who signed contracts based on the idea that it would only be in theaters first?
Right.
And I don't like the idea that we are screwing over some people whose contracts were based on box office only. Mm-hmm. But I think, unfortunately, the way it's playing out is that's becoming, okay, so we will go back to box office only, which is, I think, far worse.
I agree.
Yeah, I think, so the lawsuit around ScarJo is kind of something, it's a conversation, it prompted a conversation that needed to be had in cinema going forward, where, to Paul's point, and I agree, that we should have hybrid releases going forward. Then that raises the conversation of, okay, but now contracts need to be like reassessed. And so I feel like for the movies that have been delayed or that are just coming out brand new this year, that's going to be like murky waters. And I feel like as not even 2 months after Black Widow came out, and because of that backlash and because of how much press that lawsuit got, they're not going to do a hybrid for at least the rest of the year until they figure out on their end in the back office how they price out contracts and get things worded out that way. So yeah, I support the idea of hybrid, one for the having the ability to choose, but then also to the points that you guys have made already of people who just aren't able to go or aren't comfortable going to the theater. Like I have a really good friend who has really intense social anxiety, and he can't go. He's like a good friend of mine, but he can't go to these like group outings that I like planned with my friends because it's like crippling for him to go out and do that kind of stuff. But oh my gosh, how great would it be if I could have like 5 friends over, including him, and we could watch it at home. So like I would love to have that option, but like I personally, like I get super amped on the theater experience, and so given the choice between the two, I will pretty much always choose a theater outing, but it's the act of having the choice versus like having that taken away from, having that choice made for me, I guess. Now knowing that we could do a hybrid release, and there have been successful movies that had hybrid releases, like there from my perspective as a consumer, there's no reason not to just do hybrid going forward.
Yeah, I agree with basically everything you just said.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, people like your friend, that's exactly what I meant when I talked about how it's like both physical and mental issues can be, really hard in terms of, theaters aren't for everyone. And I think that just more options is always going to be a better thing. So
absolutely.
But I think it was, though, very important for this movie to not only come out, but do well.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And I'm glad that it does seem to have been doing well. And it's obviously because the issue of representation. And I want to quickly say as a disclaimer, with all the things going on, getting guests for this podcast was not the easiest thing in the world. I'm so glad you two could do it. Some other folks who I might have had as guests either haven't seen the movie or haven't been able to see the movie or things like that, or just schedule things have been hard. And so, we're going into talking about a movie that is obviously very important in part because the star and quite a number of the people are Chinese or Chinese American, which is not something that applies to any of the three of us. So there's a lot of great Chinese voices and Chinese American voices that have been talking about this movie, and I really want to kind of recommend people check those out as well, and I'll post some links in the show notes. But I know for both of you, there are some ways in which that aspect of the movie really connects to you. And so I want to kind of have the conversation with the three of us, but kind of name that as a disclaimer to begin with. But let me kind of just throw it out to a question for you. Obviously, people have talked a lot about, why it was so important that this be a Asian American superhero and kind of all that dynamics of that. We've talked about representation in general, but for you all, why was that important, and kind of what are the different aspects of that go into this movie?
Oh, do you want me to go first, Paul?
I was gonna let you go first.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So for me, my mother is Japanese American, and throughout my entire life, she's been a huge advocate of representation of all minorities or what is anything that's not just race, like
ethnicity,
ethnicity, but like gender and sexual orientation, like representation for all oppressed groups, I guess I could say. And so that subject has been in the back of my mind, and as a kid I never really gave it much weight. I live in a town that is primarily white and of a larger income average than your typical American, and so I grew up on like scholarships or financial aid and that kind of stuff, and so but that never really became an issue in my face until like college, when my parents don't have enough money to pay for my college, but they make too much to qualify for financial aid. And so I have to take out student loans, and then I spend, years and years and years paying those off. It's a whole thing. But representation, especially from the Asian side, like, it was such a huge deal when Black Panther came out for the same reason, for like African Americans, and being able to see someone that looks like them, looks like an African American, being on the screen and being the title character. It's the same thing for Asian kids. So Asian children don't have a whole lot of people that they can look up to as far as like title characters. And I'm trying to think of like other main Asian American or Asian characters, main characters from like other properties, and just I can't really think of any.
Like Ming-Na Wen's character in Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. I think like a lot of the TV show. There's a lot of the TV shows from Marvel and from other things have had strong Asian characters.
And then
but yeah, none of them have been like the title one. Right.
Yeah, but there's
and
never
it's
been
almost
like
always
a title,
never Asian American men.
Yeah, and then on top of that, when you get that kind of representation in, say, like a cartoon, like a Saturday morning cartoon or something, their accent's always very strong. Like they fit into like a stereotype, and you don't really get that in Shang-Chi, as far as like fitting into a stereotype and like.
Well, you're breaking up on
hard to
Paul,
understand accents and that kind of stuff. I'm sorry?
You're breaking up on us. Is that your internet having problems?
Gosh, maybe it's me. I don't know. You were breaking up on me too, so maybe it's me. I'm so sorry.
Yeah, I'm hearing the same thing.
Damn it. Well,
it sounds fine now though. It sounds fine now.
Okay. Like, so my only other point was like when you have Asian characters that are the main characters in like cartoons and stuff, usually they have really strong accents and like they fit into like a stereotypical Asian character, and you don't get that in the Shang-Chi movie, and I really liked that. It was like, it's this kid that spent the last half of his life in San Francisco in America. He's probably not going to have a very strong accent, so they don't give him a strong accent. And so it's the small little things of representation and realism that I really liked in this movie.
Yeah, it's interesting when you mention. I would say that I get my first perspective on kind of the importance of representation from my mom as well. Both my parents worked in film. My dad was a cameraman. My mom was a film editor. And she would often, point out how poor female representation was in the film industry as well. I mean, she's got stories about that. But, and describe like the one female character as like the Smurfette in, basically all fiction. I think when it comes to, Asian representation or Asian American representation, it's just been so lacking. I mean, in Hollywood cinema, right? And you'll have kung fu movies, and that was like my first concern about like Shang-Chi being the first, Asian American or Asian led superhero film, was like, oh, he's just like a guy who does kung fu. So like, you're just kind of, it felt like maybe they weren't going to do something new, maybe they were just going to have a bigger budget kung fu movie, which like, I love kung fu movies. Like I think they could be great, but it's not the same thing as a superhero movie. And yeah,
I think we talked at one point about Jimmy Woo and how awesome it is to have an Asian character in the MCU who isn't a martial artist in any way, but he's also not like, he's a bit of a nerd, but he's like good with guns. Clearly, he's good in a fight, but he's not a martial artist.
Yeah. Like Asian FBI agent isn't like a stereotype that I'm aware of,
right.
Who likes, learns prestidigitation from a superhero. Like he's, and, And so yeah, I think he's an example of great representation. I'd love to see him get his own series, maybe one with Darcy. I don't know, like the Hex Files, whatever.
I love that.
I think that, but like if you think about all the Asian characters in the MCU to date, it's like there's not a long list, And I mean, I do think like Wong's relevant, there is maybe the kind of like magical Asian stereotype or whatever that I saw someone saying that's why they, whitewashed the Ancient One to like avoid that, which would be a concern. Although I think that was more to appease the Chinese government regarding Tibet, because I think the Ancient One was supposed to be Tibetan, but yada, yada, yada. I mean, for me, like, I mean, so my wife is Chinese American. We spend a lot of time with her family. I would say I'm fairly close with them. So seeing, there were a lot of things that, I felt I could relate to personally from my experience that I, know from reading other people's accounts. It felt like it felt like a portrayal by people of a certain group as opposed to of people of a certain group, and that's what I like. There were just really small details, like when he goes into the apartment, Katie's family's apartment, like he just takes off his shoes, and that's like 2 seconds of the movie. I think literally, right? It's just like one shot, but that's like a relevant detail, but there's not a big like explanation of it. It's not treated like some unusual moment, and like when he gets a bowl of porridge for breakfast, the show, like that's like what you'd have for breakfast, and the conversation that they have, to me it feels authentic, not having grown up in that setting or culture, but having constant contact with it for like the last 20 years, more or less. Although again, in the movie, they're speaking Mandarin. My wife's family speaks Toisanese, which is closer to Cantonese, which also is what Tony Leung and I think Michelle Yeoh speak originally, and they also speak Mandarin. But like, I think it's always important to remember within this, any particular kind of, within the scope of representation, there's always going to be a certain level of specificity that isn't necessarily going to resonate with everybody who you would maybe think it does. And that might also resonate with some people that you might not think it does, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I think it does. I think that's a really well-made point. I mean, obviously, we're talking about China. It's a country of 1.2 billion people, and so it's more akin to like, it's almost like...
It's like 20% of the world, almost.
Yeah, and so like, of course, the idea of like multiple languages, multiple different cultures within that culture, things like that. And I love the things you pointed out about the like the taking off the shoes, the porridge. One that I really noticed, and I wanted to confirm with you, Paul. We did that off the air beforehand because I thought this was true, but I wanted to make sure I was right, since I'm not someone who has much contact there. In most Western movies where it's like fiction, science fiction or fantasy or Star Wars or something like that, red is almost always the color of the bad guy. The bad guy is going to wear red, or like the Sith have the red lightsabers, or like the magic is going to be more red tinted when it's, the evil wizard or whatever it is. Not always, but that's kind of often the association. And I remember noting as I was watching this movie that, I noticed for Wenwu's character, when he was using the rings, like the magic that he does is blue. And I was like, that's interesting, because that's when he was doing it, like as this conqueror, as the people, like the people who are afraid of oranges thought of as the Mandarin, which is a great joke, by the way. And then when Shang-Chi gets the rings, they become like goldish red. And all the dragon scale weapons are like this reddish, goldish color, and they're wearing red. And I was just like, oh, yeah, that's right, because the idea of red being the color of anger and aggression and evil is very much a Western concept. And in China, and I like that they kind of lampshaded this just a tad by making sure to show a wedding picture of Shang-Chi's parents, where she was wearing a red wedding dress, because my understanding is that color has it means like good fortune and good luck and things like that, and not by any means the sort of negative connotations we have with it in connection to like magic and stuff like that in American cinema.
Yeah, I think that's a good example of basically just including something and having it be kind of fundamental to the the visual look of the story and the kind of color symbolism without kind of making a big deal of it.
Yeah.
And I always appreciate that. And that's not to say that you shouldn't make a big deal out of things when you want to, but I think one thing that I really appreciated was like the scene where Katie's kind of, I think, explaining how they met. I'm not sure. Mm-hmm. Maybe it was just a college experience, but where somebody was, asking Shang-Chi or asking Sean, like, yeah, but where are you from, which I think a lot of people understand as a very, can be a very racist, xenophobic question. And
yeah, it's very, very otherizing.
Exactly. And so, I had a friend on lighting crew who somebody was like, they're like, where are you from? And he's like, Queens. And he's like, yeah, but where are you from? He's like, Flushing? Like, and, he was born in Flushing. Like, that's where he's from. And I appreciate that they, like, didn't show that scene. Because it's like, I don't think you need to show someone being harassed, like, every movie that you have. But,
right.
Every movie where you're representing someone who might be harassed for a particular thing, whether it's, because of race or gender or orientation or anything. But I think they kind of lampshaded it where they're kind of like, yeah, racism exists in this world. We're going to kind of remind you of that. But while we're doing that, we're going to really be establishing these characters and not like put it in your face in this really visceral way. And it's like, and I feel like you shouldn't always have to deal with it. Where like sometimes you could do Falcon and the Winter Soldier, but sometimes you can not, I think.
Yeah. There's a great meme that's been going around a lot of fan sites talking about like, that if every movie about this one's specific to black folk, but like it's saying, look, every black hero's origin story shouldn't be, grounded in racism.
Right.
And people have made similar ones about like, every woman hero, like it shouldn't always be that like she got her superpowers because of sexism, and I think it's got the similar thing here. And I really appreciated that in this movie, like racism is mentioned a little bit kind of in the shadows, but it's much more about, but it's not really about racism in any way, but it is very much about his experience, Shang-Chi's experience as an Asian American, kind of like all the stuff he talks about, running away from his tradition and like his family and changing his name. Obviously, in his case, it's for some very specific reasons and a very specific origin that he has very negative feelings about for very good reasons. But I know a lot of the stuff I've read has been from, Asian immigrants or first generation or people even of other immigrant experience talking about how much they could relate to that in terms of, in terms of that struggle of like, do you take a westernized name because people are not going to pronounce, do you take a westernized name or do you, make people learn your name and pronounce it properly, or how much do you kind of like assimilate or things like that. And I loved that his Shang-Chi's story was very much kind of a reference to those sort of things. Okay, everybody. So apologies. We had to stop for 1 second. Will was having real technical problems. Unfortunately, his internet has now gone out. And we tried a couple things to get him back. Didn't work. Really sucks. I would love to have him have more of his feedback, especially because he knows so much about the comics. Yeah. He's hopefully going to be sending in some texts to us that we can read and discuss. But until then, it'll be me and Paul continuing. So, Paul, let's jump back into the conversation.
So, from what I recall, you were just talking about kind of the, Shang-Chi's like journey of growing up in China and then moving to the United States and kind of having that, I guess, sort of maybe tension in his identity and not kind of feeling like he knew exactly who he was and how these different things fit in with his his own identity. I think that's a very strong theme, and I think I thought they did a very good job of dealing with that. And from things I've read, I know a lot of people whose lives it relates more directly to felt the same way. It might not resonate for everybody, but one thing I think they did to try and make a broader resonance is not just have this one Asian American character who has this one experience, right?
Right.
We have him as the protagonist, as the central protagonist, but we also have Katie, right? Who's, I believe is American-born Chinese, right? When Ronnie Chiang says to her, "Oh, it's okay, I speak ABC," I think that's kind of a reference to how I know, different people can have very different experiences based on, first of all, like where they're born, also how old they are and what's going on, in their life when they move to a new place. And I think the movie was very conscious in terms of kind of trying to have representation for different Asian American experiences and not just that of the protagonist, and kind of contrast that between those two characters. And then also have some Chinese characters who are like mainland Chinese, or Macau is this. It's kind of like Hong Kong, right? It's I forget the exact term, but basically it's somewhat autonomous, but it's not autonomous. It's part of China, but I think it was Portuguese, right? The way Hong Kong was British. And it is a big gambling mecca. I've thought about moving there to play poker, actually, and maybe someday I will if things ever get better. But I did feel like the movie really did a great job of presenting a variety of experiences. So it's not just like this is the Asian experience or this is the Asian American experience, so that there are different experiences that people can relate to personally, but also that people can kind of observe, maybe people who haven't had those experiences, and give more thought to like how it might be very different for different people, what it means to be Asian American, or more specifically Chinese American.
Yeah, like I thought the way they handled when Wenwu, Wenwu or Wingwu?
Wenwu.
Wenwu.
Yeah. If this is in the thing, I would just like to say that I'm not an expert on Chinese pronunciation. I have studied Mandarin, Cantonese, and Toisanese, or Taishanese if you want. And I have a gist of it, but
I'm taking all this out. But good to know.
What? You are taking this all? Oh.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, I wanted to actually say that on the air, but.
Oh, sure. Okay.
That's fine. But yeah, Wenwu.
Okay. I really love the way they handled Katie's character's name. There's a scene with her at dinner with Wenwu and Shang-Chi and his sister. And, Wenwu asks her what her Chinese name is. And she does know it. And she looks almost kind of embarrassed as she says it. And I was a little bit bracing for him to kind of go into a rant about like how terrible she is because she doesn't know her, true name or something like that. But he doesn't, and he's actually kind of very welcoming to her. And granted, we later know he's really trying to kind of convince them all to do something. And then by the end of the movie, I didn't pay super attention to this, but I'm fairly certain the character is still, Katie is still referring to herself as Katie. And to me, that was also kind of important of, Shang-Chi, I think, has decided, okay, yeah, I was using Sean to kind of run away from that, and I want to claim that my name is Shang-Chi. And Katie was like, yeah, I have a Chinese name, but my name is Katie.
Yeah.
And to me, that was just such a beautiful way of showing, like, yeah, the movie isn't saying, like, this is what this experience should be. It's saying all these different characters have all sorts of different experiences, and that's great.
Yeah, exactly. Like, you get to choose what various aspects of your life have what meanings to you, right? And and the fact that different characters make different choices, and it's clearly okay, I think is great, and affirming to whatever choices people make in terms of whether they want to change their name or not, or if they have multiple names, which name they'd rather go by.
Right. There's so much else in this movie I want to get to, and as I said, a lot of other people have been saying quite a lot about representation. But Paul, I know, given how important this has been for you in the lead up to the movie, is there any kind of last points you want to make about that?
Yeah. On the subject of representation, there are two things that don't have to do with being Asian or Asian American representation, but like I got totally faux rolled on the vegetarian representation on the plane scene, which which I found annoying, but like whatever, I'm used to it. And like animal character representation, I just always appreciate it.
Yeah.
Whenever we can have an animal character who's like a person, and bonus points if they're voiced by D. Bradley Baker.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. I love that, like, with the exception of the sort of primary, villain who is a demon with a sort of animal shape, so I'm not quite sure counts. Animals are in battle, but we don't have like animals being tortured or animals being killed or things that I know have often bothered you, and I haven't been great about either. So I have not loved either. So I did really love that part as well.
Yeah. And actually, in terms of like the representation, in terms of like Chinese mythology, those are, from what I've seen, like portrayals of actual, Chinese mythological creatures, and and the vegetarian thing is maybe sort of a counter stereotyping thing, also, which that's fine,
In many ways, I feel like that scene was more just about making fun of airplanes, which I wanted to be here for, but yeah.
It was kind of just for Awkwafina to riff, right? And
yeah. Which I loved, having just watched Raya and the Last Dragon, having Awkwafina having Awkwafina act against a dragon instead of being a dragon. It was kind of a nice change, but still in the same. Also, actually, one other kind of thing
both getting shot by an arrow. Oh, spoilers.
Yeah. One of the things, just on terms of this whole idea of representation, I think one of the things that we've talked about and a lot of other people have talked about is that often with a lot of these comic book characters, Black Panther, Shang-Chi, Wonder Woman, people like that, you sometimes have characters who are representation of groups that don't get represented enough, but for a while were being drawn by white men and written by white men with some of the problems of that. And that this, like, Luke Cage makes fun of the very kind of like blaxploitation outfit that his character originally wore in his show. And one thing that I've heard a lot of people comment on really that I really love is that in the comics, Shang-Chi is the son of Fu Manchu, which is a very racist. I think it was a character that started outside of Marvel in like newspaper comics. May have started with Marvel, I'm not sure. But it's a very racist caricature of sort of the Asian wise man, kind of idea. And so the fact that they changed his father to be Wenwu, so you keep helping me, and I appreciate that, Wenwu. Yeah. But the fact that they changed his father away from Fu Manchu, I thought was a really good thing. And just one more of those awareness of like, yeah, we're taking the story that has a lot of power for our culture, written by people outside that culture. And so we're going to make some changes, and that's okay.
Yeah, and I mean, Fu Manchu, I think, predates Marvel, I think, like from the 30s or something.
Yeah, I think it was like a newspaper comic, kind of like a thing like that.
Yeah, and then there's a whole rights thing that I'm sure Will would be able to illuminate us on. But yeah, like super racist stereotype. And then the Mandarin, I think, also still problematic. Like they were trying to go away from it, but maybe they didn't go that far away from it. And I've seen a lot of people say that they were very hesitant about, Shang-Chi and like where it was maybe going to go and how they're going to deal with that. And that they were kind of put at ease to some extent, at least when they heard that Tony Leung was going to be playing Shang-Chi's father. And they were like, oh, well, he wouldn't play a character like that, basically. Yeah. And very much they're so. Like, if he plays a character, that character's going to have depth and be like human, and I'm trying to find which article it was, but maybe we'll have it in the show notes. There was a good one in Time that that kind of dealt with some of that. But yeah, I mean, having problematic source material it's a hard place to start, right?
Yeah.
And I felt like they did a phenomenal job of sort of taking a character who existed in the comics and then make it basically, you know what? I haven't read the comics, so I'm not going to comment on the comics. I feel like they did a phenomenal job of making a movie that had a lot of interesting characters that felt like real people, and one of them was an Asian American superhero protagonist, and that's something we haven't had before. And it's funny because like I was originally like, oh, you know, it's kind of like the fact that they're like, you know, the master of kung fu is going to be like the first, you know, Asian lead in a Marvel movie. I was kind of like, like, I'm glad they're making it, but like, I don't know, maybe make a Jimmy Woo movie. But like, Jimmy Woo's not a superhero, and the thing in this movie was like, he's not just the master of kung fu. He gets the ring. Spoilers. He gets the rings. I know we're going full spoilers, but like, he becomes a full on superhero by the end, and some of my like preferences. It's fun. At the end, I was like, I probably would have rather enjoyed it more if it was more just like hand-to-hand combat. But like the hand-to-hand combat was phenomenal. But then they elevated him to the level of like a superhero, and I think that was really important to do that, to go that step beyond, to have a sort of like world-saving stakes. You know, which personally, I'm a little tired of world-saving stakes and CGI battles, but like, yeah, do it for this one. You know, you don't have to do it for Ant-Man. Like, that's fine. Yeah. You know, do it here.
I think that's very true. And I think one thing that also makes it even better, and apologies, this is going to be a very broad spoiler for the movie upcoming Eternals, so skip forward 30 seconds if you want to know nothing about it. But in the Eternals, there are going to be two. It's a team-up movie. It's not any one particular person, so it's not a headliner. But two of the members of that team who have been heavily featured in the ads and the trailers are, one is South Asian, the other is East Asian, and neither one of them is like their powers are coming out of the cultures that they're coming from, as far as I understand. So we will at least be getting some more of that I think would be. It would make sort of, you know, our only Asian superhero being a martial artist feel a little worse if, like, we weren't getting more of those characters pretty soon.
Yeah, and Kamala Khan, right?
Yes, definitely. Like, Kamala Khan, Ms. Marvel.
Yeah.
So that coming, her superpowers have nothing to do with her South Asian.
Right, she's heritage. Like stretchy, like.
Yeah, yeah, basically. So we talked a lot about Tony Leung and his character Wenwu. And let's kind of dive into him, because I feel like he is, to me, in many ways, the heart and soul of the movie from an ethical perspective. I mean, like, I love Simu Liu. I think he's a fantastic actor in Kim's Convenience. I think he looks great with his shirt off from a pure thirst. Like, and this is more on the thirst side of it, but like the thirst cast folks on the Straight Up Panda Network have been going crazy over him, which I think is another good thing, because there's a lot of conversation about like, will Asian men be, you know, attractive to European women or white women and stuff. And so we're blowing it out of the water. But I also got to say, like, there's some memes out there you've seen for a while of like, well, you're cute, but your daddy's hotter. And to me, that very much applies to this movie, because like he looked great, but like Tony, just every time he was on screen, like there was nowhere else to look, I thought. And I think you and I talked about one of the best acting performances in the MCU. But his character to me is so ethically rich and interesting as a villain/antagonist.
Yeah, I mean, where to begin?
Right.
I mean, I might have had a different reaction in terms of what my emotional reaction was, but like, honestly, I just feel emotional seeing him on screen. Like, I kind of almost get choked up. Like his presence is just so expressive. And the character I found very interesting. For those who don't know, he's, you know, a Hong Kong cinema legend who, to Western audiences, I guess the thing that would be the sort of most accessible entry point was he was in a movie called Infernal Affairs. Sorry, that's the English sort of translation, although it's not a literal translation, which is the movie that The Departed was based on, and sometimes almost shot for shot. He plays the Leonardo DiCaprio character and is amazing in it. And I think that original is better than The Departed, which I thought was a very good movie. But he just, I don't know, like he just has presence and like depth, and every time he says something, I just like what else are you going to do but listen to him? And I mean, I read Simu talking about, like, he was like, I was excited to be, the first, Asian superhero lead, but, like, I didn't have any idea that it would be my job to, like, stare into Tony Leung's eyes for, like, hours.
Which is great, because, like, Simu had, like, pushed for this movie to be made for such a long time. Okay, well, now you got to act against this utter legend.
Yeah.
And to me, his character just, and part of this is the acting, but also it's the writing and the direction and just the thing of the movie. Like, he is the antagonist for most of the movie, but he's so sympathetic. And I found, and we'll talk about this in a minute, like the journey he goes on of being this person, yes, who is kind of reprehensible. He is a conqueror. He is, just out for slaughter. And then clearly, like, he put that aside, and I think the way the movie does this is brilliant, because at first I didn't realize that he had stopped being this conqueror, secret assassin kind of person.
Right.
And so when the mother was selling, like, yeah, here's all these things your father has done, isn't he a good man? I was kind of like, what, how do you reconcile this?
Yeah.
But when it became clear that he had actually stopped all that, he had taken off the rings, he'd gone back to kind of trying to live a normal life with
Yingli.
What is it? Say again? Yingli, thank you. With Yingli and his children, and that it was only his grief at her death, as well as the fact of kind of thinking, like, she died because I put down the power, that he decided to take it back, and I kind of joked with you, like, to me, this is the best betrayal of Anakin Skywalker I've ever seen.
Right.
In terms of that, like, going to the dark side to protect his wife, and also getting the, like, at the very end of the movie, I'm going to protect my son and have a moment of goodness, right before I die. Right. So the Darth Vader vibes were very strong there.
They were.
But I just, because they never sort of made him, like, pure evil, or did a, like, oh no, actually everything he's done is pure good, Which, in that dinner scene when he was talking about rescuing his mother, I was a little worried that it would be, okay, everyone's now on his side and the whole happy family is going to go off and do happy family things, and not forget about all the people on that bus who got killed because of the things that Wenwu was doing to try and get his son's pendant and stuff like that, And I really liked that they didn't turn him into a mustache twirler or into, like, no, actually he's a misunderstood hero. He was just a person who had this incredible power, and the power led him to do a lot of awful things, and then gave up the power, and then only took up the power and wanted to use it for very understandable reasons, even if he was very clearly being manipulated.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting spin on the sort of, I mean, it's like the Vader story, except if Anakin, for 1,000 years before he became good, was, like, the Emperor.
Right, yeah.
Like, if he was a Sith to begin with, because, I mean, it seems like he was, he was a conqueror. Like, I don't think that's a great thing to be,
Yeah.
So for 1,000 years, he was, like, going around doing bad stuff. And then he met someone, fell in love, and it changed his life. We could talk about that fight scene in the beginning, and how it, like, to me, it was like she was, like, showing him another way, kind of almost like another way to use violence, but that, I don't know, there's so much there, but that he changed fundamentally. He gave up eternal life, right? Like, the rings were giving him, it's like the One Ring. They're giving him unnaturally long life, and he was like, I think he said, I finally found something worth, or someone worth growing old for, or a reason, something worth growing old for. And then her dying and him feeling like it was his fault, like, sends him back deeper into the, the pit of, like, wherever he was before he met her. And now he's got these kids, and he's like, I'm going to make, I'm going to turn, our son into, like, an Avenger, literally. And then at the end, it was just so clear that he wasn't, like, seeking some additional power or whatever, that he had this very pure intention, but that it was from, you know, a corrupting delusion induced by this like evil creature being, you know?
Like you said, there's so much to get into here. I wanted to start, though, with a fight scene you brought up, because I want to hear you talk about it more, because I'm not a martial artist. I know very little about it. And I'm on record as saying that I don't really love the whole we're going to beat each other up until we kiss kind of like flirt, you know, fighting meet cute thing that happens a lot.
Right.
That fight scene that become the fight that becomes a dance between the two of them, I think was my favorite scene in the movie because I felt that without saying a word, it's so perfectly captured. Excuse me. You know, he was being aggressive. She was defending, but she basically like slowly, gradually turns it from a fight into a dance. And so much of it's about like redirecting his attacks and kind of redirecting his energy. And you were telling me about it some in martial arts terms that I hope you'll repeat. But it just was such a beautiful expression of the role she has in his life, you know, in that she's his equal, first of all, which is something he's never really found before. But also she's able to kind of like, to me, it was such a perfect microcosm of that whole relationship you were just talking about, you know, that she was able to kind of see all of that like anger and aggression and redirect it and turn it in new ways, as well as kind of like call him out a bit, you know, and like dunking him in the water, literally. And like the little smile smirk he has at the end of that was just so perfect, where he's like, oh yeah, okay, this is someone who can challenge me and make me think in new ways. And I just loved everything about that fight scene.
And that's kind of paralleled when Wenwu sends Shang-Chi into the water and he kind of comes out sort of made anew in some ways. I'm actually, I could respond to that directly, but I see Will sent us some text, which the beginning of it relates directly to this. So I'm going to just
sure. I was going to quote it, but go ahead.
Anyway, Will says, martial arts, Wenwu's fighting style, as influenced by the power of the rings, is close-fisted. It's about putting as much power behind your attacks as possible, as opposed to Ying's tribe style, which is open-handed and follows a flow. In terms of like Avatar, fire and earthbending is more forceful and impactful, while air and water can change the flow of a battle, using your opponent's inertia and guiding it around your body. Is how Wenwu couldn't beat Yingli. So then having Shang-Yi be the yin and yang of both those styles and blending them together was awesome to watch. I loved that. Totally.
Yeah, I think that's such a good way to put it. One thing I did notice is that in the fight scene on the bus, Shang-Chi's fists are closed.
Yes.
And then they're open in those last fight scenes. And I didn't really understand the significance until I read this comment by Will. So thank you so much.
And there's a scene where Michelle Yeoh, another absolute legend, by the way, like basically is like physically opens his fists, right?
She plays his aunt, who kind of helps train him
Correct.
when he goes to the village.
Yeah. So she basically teaches him like their style, right? And but the point is like now he has both. He's both those things. He's not just one, and he gets to choose kind of what he wants to use and take from each of them. And I mean, there's a moment when she's like airbending, it seems, right? Like literally the air is moving around her. But I believe she's using kind of like Tai Chi movements, which is actually what they used for waterbending in Avatar.
Oh, that's awesome.
So, yeah, I mean the kind of parallel, and those four elements aren't like I mean, there's like 5 Chinese elements, but Avatar anyway. So yeah, I loved that fight scene. As someone who like, I respect your dislike of that trope, and I think there's a lot of bad examples of it. I remember saying like it doesn't bother me so much, perhaps because like my wife and I fought before we dated, you know,
Yes.
like literally physically we punched and kicked each other because we met at Taekwondo. And
thank you for adding that clarification.
Yeah. Very, very important detail there.
Yeah.
And you know, just as a martial artist, I felt like that fight sort of showed, you know, the beauty of martial arts, which some of the other scenes showed the kind of more kinetic, violent aspects of it. But there's, it's movement, right? Mm-hmm. And any movement that generates power could be used for a variety of things. It can be used to cause damage, but there are also techniques you can use that are meant to disarm or disable, or when he's fighting his sister, right there. Mm-hmm. I think that's when it was. He's like basically trying to kind of like restrain her. It doesn't go so well for him, but but that's a different, like, and it's my theory that like those are probably the martial arts that should be taught to, if you're going to have people going around enforcing laws or whatever, like they should learn the soft, open-handed martial arts. But don't have to go too far down that one.
That makes sense. Like the Tai Chi Kid, I think, would make a better TV series in some ways than the Karate Kid right now.
Yeah.
So I can understand where you're coming from. Although I'm crossing from a Japanese martial art to a Chinese martial art. I want to be very clear about that.
Yeah, it could be the Aikido Kid then.
There you go. But yeah, and what do you think about kind of the way his journey played out at the very end? I mean, we've made the Darth Vader joke, and I think that's kind of relevant, but I feel like it was, for me, I felt like it was I don't often like the, like, I do one good thing and then I die and so everything is forgiven. Mm-hmm. But it felt in this case very appropriate, of he's not like make this big statement of everything he did was wrong. In some ways, it's the same motivation. It's that he loves and wants to help protect his family. And, he has this great power and he's willing to use that great power to do anything he can to get his wife back. Yeah. And I think, that's a very classic story about power corrupting. I mean, that's exactly the Anakin Skywalker story, just told much better. But at the end, I like that he's he still wants to give the power to someone in his family. Yeah. And so he gives the rings to Shang-Chi and clearly helps Shang-Chi in his kind of final actions, which I just thought was a really beautiful way of, ending his story as it doesn't make him a hero all of a sudden, but it's a very fitting end.
Yeah, I was kind of like, of course they're going to kill the antagonist because Marvel always kills the antagonists. And like, I would like to see more of his story. I'm a little bit optimistic after the mid-credit scene that maybe he'll be in some backstory about how he found the rings and stuff.
That would be really good.
Like I would watch that. 'Cause just like, I don't know, like you give that good a performance, like now we don't get that character anymore.
Well, especially because I kind of felt the movie had the wrong name.
Right.
It really should be Shang-Chi and the Legend of Ta Lo. Ta Lo? I'm sorry, I'm so bad. This is not about pronunciation. This is about I'm the person who talked about Stan Sebastian and names. What was the name of the village?
I think it was Ta Lo.
Ta Lo, yeah. Ta Lo. In some ways, I kind of, because like at the end, I don't actually know anything about the origins of the rings.
Right, yeah.
So we didn't really get the legends of them. But still, yeah, so I think that would be another, because Tony Leung is such a great actor. Don't let go of him, Yeah.
Yeah. But like, to your point, it felt earned and it felt right. And it felt like he saw that he was wrong just literally wrong. Like he thought he was going to save his wife and he wasn't, and he was wrong. And then he's like, what do I do from here? Well, I'm pretty much hosed, but like, I see that a lot of what I loved in Ying Li is, in our son. And so I want him to have the rings. Like he had trained him from the time he was 7 until he was 14 to take the rings. Right?
Yeah.
And this is sort of him both kind of like, I don't know, repenting or whatever, or like giving up his mistaken quest for saving his wife, and also the completion of the thing he did while he was being like super bad.
Yeah. Like the thing he wanted to do while being like, this is not Parent of the Year material by any means,
Yeah.
And one thing I thought that made that transition so beautiful, and this gets more into Shang-Chi's story, which we can talk about the ethical questions of, but I think it was so significant. During his fight with his father, he takes 5 of the rings from his father, but he never puts them on. Like, they're rotating around him and circling around him, and he kind of claims them, and they change color, which we talked about the significance of that. But he uses them to defeat his father, and eventually kind of takes all 10, but then he just kind of throws them all on the ground, and it's not till his father gives them to him in that that he kind of really puts them on, which I thought was just such another like beautiful little twist.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I don't want to go too hard to like compare this to Black Widow, but just in specifically sort of the parents and the journey, particularly like of the father, like contrasting this like
that with Red Guardian.
Yeah. It felt like but for both parents really in that like there was this kind of like perfunctory redemption. Where it's like some people are like, oh, what I didn't like about it was that they weren't redeemed. And some people are like, well, what I didn't like about it was that they were redeemed. And like, I think we were kind of both on the same page of like, it felt like it's sort of like they said they were redeemed, but they weren't really.
Right.
And here it felt like I guess the question's open because like, and it's kind of irrelevant because like he's dead, but it felt like both, but in a way that felt right, Yeah,
I mean, if it did, I think especially that last scene of the lighting the lamps and the paper lanterns and sending them out into the water, and the fact that they specifically light one for their mother, him and his sister, for their mother and their father, I thought was a nice way of kind of acknowledging that.
Yeah. I agree.
Yeah. So let's talk about Shang-Chi's journey. First, this isn't really an ethical thing, but just something I kind of want to lampshade. I wonder if you felt the same way. Going into this, I had a lot of feeling of like, I love the character of Young so much from Kim's Convenience. And that's not a martial arts superhero. It's going to be so hard for me to see him as something different. And I kind of felt like the first 10 minutes of the movie in which he's this kind of like doofus of a parking attendant who's just kind of going through life was kind of him being the Kim Convenience character. And then, although that character's a lot more confident, and then the movie kind of being like, okay, so let's transition what you know of this actor into this character.
Yeah.
And I just thought that was such a nice way of like recognizing the character's popularity in a very different genre.
Yeah, I mean, the fact that it's both like car things, right? So my sort of journey of Shang-Chi just like as an idea was like, oh great, they're going to make an Asian-led film finally, right?
Yeah.
To then like, I'm not crazy that it's like the Master of Kung Fu. I'm still, it's one of those like, I'm happy that it's being made instead of not being made. But like, what if you made a character that had some other power that like was not, directly connected to their heritage or whatever. Right. To then like watching Kim's Convenience and then like reading that like seemingly it was going to be Shang-Chi, I was like, what? And I was like super excited. And then I was like, wait, am I just going to see Jung the whole time? Like, am I going to be able to not see him as Jung Kim? Like, and it was a real concern. And it's easier for like Paul Sun-Hyung Lee where, you see him as Appa, or I think Sang-Yeol Kim in Mr. Kim in Kim's Convenience. And then you see him as Carson Teva and you're like, well, he sounds totally different, Right. Like he's doing a Korean accent in the one, and in the other, he's got his natural Canadian accent. Here, you don't have that, right? I mean, he kind of sounds the same. I saw someone in one of the thirst posts comment on Simu's voice, which like I find just very like calming. Like, I don't know, he's got a great voice, and but it feels very distinct, right? So I was a little concerned that like maybe I'm not going to be able to see him as, not that like I don't buy it, because I was like, well, I know he can do stunts, I know he can do comedy, I know he can do drama, and like I know he likes taking Instagram pics with his shirt off, and people love it. So like sounds perfect for a Marvel hero, right? And then when I found out all the rest of the cast, I was like, oh my goodness. And like the cinematographer and the stunt coordinator, and listen to the director and the writer, and I got like really hyped for the movie, which like isn't a thing that happens much anymore. And yeah, in the beginning, I really do think they played into that of like, you know, like, yeah, this is his cover, right? So then everything that you think about your kind of preconceptions, it's like, now, boom, we're going to bust the cover. And this is also who this guy is, you know? He's not the cover. Like, the cover isn't really fake, right? I mean, it is who he is, but it's not all of who he is.
Yeah. Well, I think that kind of gets us into some of the ethical questions to talk about with this character, because I think, you know, he's really a character who's trying to find himself, in part because, you're right, in some ways, I think Sean isn't a cover. It's him trying to find a new version of self, because the version of himself was pretty awful. And in some ways, I really like that he at first lies to Katie, but then does admit that he did commit, you know, he did do the assassination. And like, yeah, because it's done in a way of like, I'm not going to judge a 14-year-old who's been brainwashed and abused by their father to be a little kill. You know, like, child soldiers are not ethically responsible for the things they do in the same way a lot of other people would be. You know, I mean, it's a very gray moral area, but I think like we should have a lot of forgiveness there. And he's absolutely a child soldier in that regard. But it does still make him like, you know, for him at 14 to go through all of that and know that his father's command was wrong and decide not to do it would feel a little too like, look how good and perfect he is. And so I love that. Yeah, he did go through it. He did. And again, you know, he killed the person who helped kill his mother. So again, like, lots of ways this is a pretty justifiable action. But you also understand how horrified he was from that. And that, you know, his whole decision to become Sean is not a response to running away from that. And that it's through his mother and through his aunt that he gets to kind of like reconcile all these parts of his identity, and not that like, this is a fake and this is real, but just I can integrate all of these into my like holistic idea of myself.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't have that much to add to that. That's pretty much how I feel, you know? I do think like, you know, by the time you're 14, like you have, I think you have a larger level of agency than most people ascribe to 14-year-olds. You know, at the same time, when you're raised in a compound by a warlord assassin who teaches you to be an assassin, like I have a lot of, you know, sympathy, empathy for like where a person might be coming from, you know, and I also believe in redemption and forgiveness, and, you know, the idea, or I don't know if that's the way I most want to put it, but like, I believe in the idea that people can do good things, and those same people can do bad things. And, you know, just because you've done whatever bad things doesn't mean you can't be like, you know what, going forward, I want to do things that, I don't know, help people, or just like, don't kill people. Like, I just want to stop killing people. Although he does kill like a bunch of people.
Yeah, for sure.
Like,
and what, to me, one thing it really reminds me of, and so Paul and I have also talked about The Wire is one of our absolute favorite TV shows. And just very recently before we recorded this, Michael K. Williams, who plays Omar, who, you want to talk about representation, was for a lot of people, especially a lot of you know, straight men, their first real coming to terms with a gay character. Just a phenomenal performance, because he's very much breaking the gay stereotype. Which gay stereotype is because he's very much breaking that stereotype. But to me, and so I'm thinking about The Wire a lot, and because to me, that's a lot of what The Wire is about, is a number of the major characters in The Wire are these little kids who've grown up kind of in a compound, you know, where everyone around them is involved in the game of drug selling and the violence that goes along with it. And so you have these like 13, 14, 15-year-olds who are committing these horrible acts of violence, and some get redemption stories and some don't. And it's to me a very, you know, I kind of want to plug that show in general in kind of honor of Michael Williams, who's just, again, such a loss, so sad about that. And we may well do an episode about that, but with moving, it's probably going to be delayed a couple weeks. But like, to me, that show, it really reminds, Shang-Li's journey really reminds me of those kids, you know, in terms of that, like, yeah, it's not that at 14 or 15, anybody is ethically off the hook, but that like where you're raised is going to have a huge influence on what you think of as right or wrong. And that we need to kind of take that into account when judging the actions of someone at that, of any age, but especially at that age.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, I just want to double up on the Wire is an amazing show. I would love to be part of the podcast, but I don't think it's going to work out because life. But I look forward to listening to it. Michael Kenneth Williams is an amazing actor. Not just like the portrayal of Omar. I think not just being like a gay character, but like a black gay character, I think is even more right. Particularly unusual at that time, groundbreaking. And I did have the pleasure of playing poker with Michael Kenneth Williams actually, and he was shooting an episode for Vice in the Underground Poker Club, and he I met him the one time, but like he was just super nice and chill, and just seemed like a great dude. And so another tragedy.
Yeah, so raise a glass to that man. Definitely check out The Wire. But you also, in terms of that connection with the kids.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, season 4 of The Wire, I think, is the one where they start like focusing on schools and just seeing the the trajectories of the different kids and how they maybe don't know. You think, oh, this kid's going to go this way, this kid's going to go this way, but you just see the circumstances of life and how things can really pull people in directions, and that. I don't know. It doesn't matter how old you are. You can do harm, right? Yeah. But at the same time, to what extent should you be culpable / where do we go from there? I don't know. It's a really hard question. And I can definitely see the Wire connection though, for sure.
Yeah. One other quick plug for The Wire. It also stars as one of the younger kids who is like caught up in this life. Michael B. Jordan, who later plays Killmonger, among other great characters in his acting career. That's one of his first kind of breakout roles. But so back to the Shang-Chi especially, and so turning back to Shang-Chi and his journey, it's funny. While I was watching the movie, a part of me really liked the idea, like when he's using the rings but not putting them on. Yeah. I kind of felt like there was this idea of the rings are corrupting, and so he wouldn't put them on. And I kind of didn't like that he put them on until I think actually some of the comments you've made today have helped really kind of turn my opinion around on it, and some of the comments you and I were having beforehand, because I feel like it's this idea of like the rings themselves aren't good or bad. It's that in some ways Shang-Chi is stronger than his father. Right. He's able to use them and granted, like he's now had them for 6 hours.
Right.
Who knows where he's going to go in 5 years with them or whatever. But, and again, that's, now I really want to get the movie that is entirely set in the past and should be 100% in Mandarin or a version of the language that would have been spoken at that point, but just like a great 13th century China epic of him because what if the father actually wanted to be a do-gooder for 30 or 40 years and just everything he did failed and he was like, screw this, I'm just going to take over. But anyway, that's a whole other story. But yeah, to me, him taking the rings and being able to use them for good, I just thought was such a wonderful, just especially because he'd already kind of he started using the magic martial arts of his mother, like that beautiful, the kind of tracing a half circle in the ground with your back foot, as kind of as the symbology of the Tai Chi magic part of the martial arts. Having him do that actually makes real sense that he also uses the magic of his father and then becomes kind of the embodiment of the two of them together.
I want to see that movie, and one thing that might give someone hope would be that the Departed. Spoilers for The Departed. I guess skip ahead 2 minutes if you've never seen it, if you want. But the Leonardo DiCaprio. Tony Leung character gets killed at the end, but he was such a good character. The Hong Kong original, they did Infernal Affairs 2, which was a prequel, so they could have Tony Leung in it. So
I like that.
So maybe this character who was amazing and got bumped off early will get a prequel, and I will watch it.
Yeah, I'd be into that. I'd totally be into that. So I want to kind of use that discussion we just had about the rings and Shang-Chi as the embodiment of his parents to shift into our next topic. Was there anything specifically about kind of the ethical questions around Shang-Chi's character that you wanted to mention?
Not a lot. I mean, it's interesting that he had he assassinated someone and then decided he didn't want to be an assassin. This kind of references a conversation we've had before, but some people are trying to kill him on the bus and he tosses them out the bus and they probably died. And then some people are trying to kill him on the scaffolding, and he tossed them off the scaffolding, and they probably died. And like, I love Batman. I love characters who find ways to not kill people who are trying to kill them. But I also think if someone's trying to kill you, and you think the only way you can defend yourself is to respond with lethal violence, I think, as long as you're rational and that's a real threat, like, I think that's a thing. And,
I love the Batman reference you have there, because to me, there are two very different things that I think the debates about Batman always conflate, and it drives me crazy, which is I will not kill someone versus I will not murder someone.
Right.
Because to me, murder is like killing when it's not in self-defense, when it's not as part of a fight. It's just like, I am going to kill this person because I want them to be dead, who's not in any way a threat to me right now. And like, to me, I see like a really understandable moral stance as a character who says like, I will not murder. Like, you could say like what Thor does to Thanos would cross that line. Yeah. Absolutely. But I won't, I'll kill if I have to kill in battle. And I think with Shang-Chi, it's such a great thing because, he does commit one murder in his life. Right. The killing of the person who killed his mother when he's 14. And clearly that really, wrecks him. And he has a chance to kill his father when he's first defeated his father. And he just kind of throws the rings off, which I thought was another kind of very symbolic, like, I won't go that far the way my father might have.
Right. And like, he might have killed them if they were currently involved in the struggle still.
Right. Yeah.
But he was drawing that line of like, I'm not going to kill someone who is defenseless, basically.
Right. Yeah, I mean, like, when you're fighting with lethal weapons, the fact that like the other person blocks all of your attacks, like if that attack hit, you were probably going to kill them.
Right. Exactly.
That's something the movies often don't kind of go into.
Yeah.
I'm really glad we're having this conversation about the rings, because it's also a good transition into the next topic I want to get to, which is his sister, Shang-Chi's sister, and then also Katie, Awkwafina's character. But first with his sister, because the transition for me is like, I did have a moment of thinking like, why does he get all 10 rings? She has also become this great martial artist. In her case, it was like her father didn't train her. She had to learn it all on her own, which I thought was such a great story. Oh, yeah. And like, I mean, we've made this joke, like, if you haven't seen the TV show The Warrior, you've kind of seen a lot of it in the first half hour of this movie, but definitely check out that show. But it's a very similar, like, brother leaves sister behind kind of story. But I did kind of have a moment of like wishing that she was getting some of the rings. And I know that he is the hero and he's the title character, but they did so much with her. And I really loved that at the end, like, he gets the power, he gets the rings, but she gets the 10 rings organization, which I did think was a really nice, like, oh, okay, now I see what you're doing.
Yeah, they both got 10 rings.
Yeah.
Yeah, I honestly, I was thinking the same thing too. I was like, like, should they split them? Like, why does he get all the power? And it's like, well, because his name's in the title. But like, it is like, it is like, why is it his story and not her story? You could have told her story instead, and they decided to tell his story. And I think that's fine,
And certainly I feel like, I mean, she is not dead at the end of this. I think she's very clearly going to be a major part of the MCU going forward.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, she runs the 10 rings now, right? So, I think we'll see a lot more from Xialing going forward.
And one cool thing about that was pointed out by someone in the Stranded Panda chat, I certainly didn't notice it, but one of the women who's training as part of the 10 rings in that final scene was one of the widows who was freed at the end of Black Widow. So that's kind of another cool connection of like, that's where one of them went.
For sure.
Which I really kind of love.
And I think she actually showed up in the Fight Club. She was in one of the like little like
that's
fish
cool.
tank fighting things. Fighting someone who looked like they had the Extremis formula going through them. Yeah. So
I love that whole scene.
Yeah.
It was so well done.
Yeah.
Especially the little Wong and Abomination kind of fixing their fights.
Oh yeah, that was great. That was great. I'd like to see more from her. I thought the actress Meng'er Zhang did a great job as well, and I think it's her first feature film. She was like a theater actor before.
And I kind of bring her up in relation to Katie, not because like there's a number of very powerful women characters in this movie, but I felt like between the two of them, each one of them took parts of what is often kind of the trope of the romantic, the romantic character in the movie for like the male hero to win.
Yeah.
And, because when like we've joked before about like the fight that becomes a kiss, the enemies to lovers story is very much a part of it. And here they kind of did the enemies to something story,
Allies.
but with his sister.
Yeah.
And it's enemies to like siblings. And I loved that twist on that story.
Yeah, I mean, I loved that. I loved the whole Katie, Sean, and Shang-Chi dynamic. I love that they had a very real, honest feeling friendship between a male and a female character that wasn't romantic or sexual. Mm-hmm. Like, it's cool to have those that are as well, but like sometimes don't do that, just because the two buddies in the film are of opposite gender doesn't mean like they have to get together. Right. I know at some point that was basically the rule of Hollywood storytelling, but
yeah, I had a little bit of a worry that when he went to the village, there'd be some like pretty maiden there who would fall for him, and they just didn't do that, which I really loved.
Yeah, I mean, they could have had a 4-hour movie, and I mean, I already feel like they could have expanded the movie to be a lot longer. Yeah. See, the thing is, it's like this movie actually had a more compelling love story than any MCU movie that comes to mind.
Oh yeah, like that dance is the most romantic scene I've ever seen in an MCU movie, hands down.
And yet there wasn't a romance that felt shoehorned into the plot. And I often feel like having a romance is like too much for the main character to do when they're like trying to do the thing, right? Like the protagonist is the person who's supposed to do the thing. And if they also have to have this love story, then also that character often ends up feeling like an accessory. And, the thing that I think they had to navigate also that I imagine they put thought into is like they wanted to avoid the like desexualization of Asian men as well at the same time, because that's totally a thing, as well as the fetishization of Asian women. And I feel like they did a good job of that by, letting Simu Liu be like hot, right? And be like, we'll have the Marvel shirt off scene like that. We like, what? And then Katie's like, what happened to your shirt? Like, but
such a good line.
Then you also have Tony Leung,
And although I want to kind of offer a little bit of a different perspective on the relationship between Shang-Chi and Katie, and I might be completely projecting here, but I think this was a little bit the intent. And kind of as background, like one thing that I often hear a lot about, I spend a lot of time like in polyamorous communities, but often in communities that are like discussing, queer communities or anything like that. They're discussing like, what does it mean to have a relationship with someone? And like, why do we tend to think that like, there's romantic relationships and there's platonic relationships and there's like an iron line between the two, and you're either very solidly in one box or the other. And that one of the things that polyamory really opens up, but also even for monogamous people as well, is that there's a lot of relationships that fall somewhere in a gray area, and maybe sexuality is a part of it, and maybe it's not, and maybe some degree of like romantic affection's a part of it, and maybe it's not. And it just is a gray area that doesn't have to be defined. And that's kind of how I saw their relationship, because often there have been a couple times where it's a man and a woman who are good friends, but they're clearly not dating. And they very intentionally bookmark that, and they have one of them have a partner that the other one is always teasing them about, or they have people be like, oh, you two hang out a lot, you must be a couple. And they're like, no, of course not. And they're never physically affectionate to each other. But in this one, like, I mean, there's that scene at the very end where like she's leaning against him in a way that like, yeah, friends will do sometimes, but like often could be like that there is something there. And she certainly gave him a lot of looks that I think anyone who's attracted to masculine bodies was probably giving that actor the same looks. Right. But like, they kind of said like, yeah, she recognizes attractiveness. And there were just a number of things through the movie that made me feel like, even like the fact that they go on like double dates basically with another couple, but they're never like, oh, are you guys a couple? Are you not? There may have been no joke about that I'm forgetting.
Yeah. Like, when are you guys going to get married or something like that?
Oh, yeah, it was from the grandmother, I think, yeah. But it wasn't from their peers, I think. Am I right about that, or am I forgetting
I'm not
something?
sure. I feel like they both might have said it, but maybe it wasn't.
Okay. Yeah. But yeah, so to me, I feel like I don't think there's any reason to say, oh, there's definitely a romance there. There's going to be a romance. And I think them being friends is very important for all the reasons you're saying. But I also feel like this movie was doing something a little bit different of like letting them kind of be in a gray area where romance or sexuality is possible, but isn't where they are. And also like kind of saying that like if they do kiss at some point later, that's not going to fundamentally change their relationship, you know, which I found that really refreshing to see that kind of like gray area-ness.
Yeah, I can see that. I mean, I didn't feel like there was this clear distinction. It just that there definitely wasn't actively something.
Yeah,
right. But
I think that's very true.
But it did feel like there's a door open. Although I don't know. I kind of at the end when Captain Marvel was like, "Get my number from Bruce," you know. I was like,
"Oh yeah."
But yeah, I don't know. I did feel like it felt like they had a very special relationship, you know, and that at that time there wasn't like a physical. Well, there was like a physical intimacy, but not like a sexual intimacy. And I don't know. I kind of feel like if you can have that, then it seems less likely to that you're going to go in another direction later, but not necessarily impossible.
I mean, and like there are people who are asexual or aromantic, and I don't think either one of those characters is necessarily. But I just like, I think we're in the last 10 or 15 years, people really been understanding that the world of ways that people can relate to each other are just not. It's a lot more complicated than the binary of just friends or dating.
For sure.
And I just think that I thought this movie did a really good job exploring that.
And I mean, I don't know. I'll just float this. Like, I wouldn't be shocked if like Shang-Chi was like the first like openly gay Marvel superhero at some point. You know, like I don't think his sexuality was addressed in any way. Right. Really in the movie, you know, and so like
I mean, he kind of had more important things going on.
He kind of did, like, you know. He kind of did,
you know, because I mean, I think that's one of the reasons why sometimes that shoehorned in plot often bothers me. Is it's like, okay, you've just found out all these things are happening, but yeah, you got time to like process falling into bed with someone. Go ahead,
right.
Or even worse, I'm so dedicated to avenging the death of my wife. Yeah. And I'm going to sleep with this person as part of that journey. It's just like, I mean, I get that. You can be in a place of like wanting to avenge someone, but still be interested in someone new. But like, let's not make that happen all the time. But anyway, yeah, so I just thought those two relationships were both such nice ways of, you know, you had a woman his age, both of whom were very attractive in very different ways. And they both got to sort of like, they kind of checked some of the boxes of the love interest trope without either actually being that trope, and both being not only non-romantic roles in his life, but completely fully developed characters who I felt never did anything that wasn't like, there was never a moment where I was like, okay, they're doing that so they can get this story with him. I understood who those two characters were, and they always did things that made sense for their characters.
Yeah. And I mean, they both had motivations and growth, you know, and I think I feel like there's like maybe 4 main characters that have that, right? I didn't feel that so much from Auntie, but I like her character. I enjoyed her character and felt like real, but there wasn't like a big arc there, right? From Ying Nan, but that. You know, you had 4 characters who had arcs, and it's like getting 4 arcs into a movie isn't that easy, and I felt like they did it pretty well. Yeah.
No, I was very impressed by that. I think we can kind of start wrapping up because it's already gone very long, but we knew that with it. That I'm so sorry Will couldn't join us, but if he had been here, we would have gone to 3 hours easily. Let me kind of read his last comment, and I want to make, we can discuss it, and then we can also kind of make any last comments we have. This will probably be 20 more minutes, but hopefully we can keep it not quite that long. So Will, in terms of we've been talking entirely about the movie because both me and Paul are not really very familiar with the comic book character, but Will just made one other comment about the comics. Shang-Chi was introduced in the 70s as the secret son of Fu Manchu, a Chinese crime lord introduced in novels in the early 1900s. So actually, I was wrong about the newspaper thing. Marvel eventually didn't have rights to using Fu Manchu, so they kind of dropped that tidbit into the Secret Avengers run, where they ended up explaining that Shang-Chi's father's real name is Zheng Zhu. I'm probably pronouncing his name very poorly. Zheng Zhu, thank you. and he discovered the gift of immortality. One of the names he's gone by is Fu Manchu, thus bringing in his original plot but not using the actual novel character. So, legal fun. Shang-Chi has been on the Avengers, Heroes for Hire, and I want to see him interact with Iron Fist, which I have a whole bunch of thoughts on. That's going to be my last comment.
For sure.
He's used extraterrestrial energies, Pym particles, and weapons made by Iron Man. He's been a teacher to Spider-Man, Captain America, and Wolverine. His martial arts skills have gotten him recognized as a mortal that can compete with the gods, since he's fought Ares, builders, and other comic godly beings. That said, he doesn't actually have any powers. He's an expert fighter and has control over his mind and spirit. That last part only became important when he had countless copies of himself, when he had to fight an infection that gave him spider powers. Guys, comic books are nuts. He's been in less than 200 issues of comics in the 50 years since he's been introduced. He's only been the title character once in the last 40 years, which kind of just a representation point. Like, Simu Liu was pushing for this character to be made into a movie for a long time. I think, like, he hasn't been a major character, but, like, talk about a great sign of how important, how hungry people are for representation and how they will find it wherever they can. That this character who's been very much a minor character overall in Marvel was so important to that actor and the one he wanted to push for. So my exposure to Shang-Chi in the comics is pretty limited. He's been important in the sense that he's been a pivotal participant in some storylines, but he usually isn't the focus of the comic.
Yeah, and I think Agents of Atlas was the one that you got distracted by wanting to see him with Iron Fist, but I also I kind of want to see him in Agents of Atlas also with Jimmy Woo, like just because whatever gets us a Jimmy Woo series, like come on.
To me, it was actually Heroes for Hire that distracted me, but yes, that would also be because
no, that's what I mean. Yeah, that's what I was saying. I might have said it wrong.
Oh, okay, I didn't realize they were the same thing.
Oh,
got it.
No. What I was saying is because Heroes for Hire made you want to see him with Iron Fist, right? Then I think Agents of Atlas got left out. Agents of Atlas is like Jimmy Woo's like S.H.I.E.L.D.-esque team, I think, but I don't know that.
Oh, okay.
Now
I'm
like,
all
I
coming
want
together.
to. And Jimmy Woo supposedly has this really unproblematic history as a comic character, which is like a miracle because, like, you know, there's not a lot of that. So, and also he's from San Francisco. They're both in San Francisco. Throwing some Ant-Man.
Yeah. So the one thing I want to say, and that leads well to, is there's obviously a lot of parallels in this movie with the Iron Fist story, you know, in that, like, they're going to China and in sort of like the you know, there's a secret passage that you can find in that part of Asia that will get you to this like different dimension of like a martial arts loving village.
Right.
Like, and then I had to Google because I wasn't sure, like, is Tola like a different name for Kunlun? And it turns out it's not. And in the comics, at least, there's this idea of there's like 30 different sort of like pocket dimensions of other places that you can access through various parts of Asia, since Kunlun is accessed through Tibet, at least in some versions of the stories. But including that and doing it in, especially this idea that he does go to that place to really improve his powers and to learn more about his powers. And there's a dragon. Yeah, and they're all using like dragon weapons. Like, it felt to me like they were somewhat intentionally referencing Iron Fist. And I don't want to... I think it would be problematic to be like, oh, all martial arts movies about martial arts from Asia in Marvel have to reference each other. But I think given all of the kind of controversy around Iron Fist and, you know, Danny Rand being the, like, white guy who goes to Asia, etc., which we've discussed before, we don't need to get back into that. But it did feel to me like they were trying to be like, you know, we tried to do the story with Danny Rand. It had some real problems, some about race, some about just the show itself. Let's kind of redo that story in a much better way.
Yeah, I have no idea how much that went into the thinking. I mean, I know they very clearly were trying to subvert a lot of stereotypes and tropes. It does feel very similar story-wise. I wonder whether I don't know. I haven't really dug into you know, what led them to do. Have a story centering kind of around Ta Lo, but it is kind of interesting. It's like, well, how does it relate to Kunlun, you know? And I have a lot of thoughts about Danny Rand as a character, and I think
We recorded an episode or two of Iron Fist where I think we went into that in a lot greater detail.
I guess what I want to say about it is that I feel like if you had, I mean, maybe a little bit more different of a story, but like, I feel like I'm more interested in seeing Danny Rand in a world that has Shang-Chi in it.
Yeah, I can see that.
And because I don't think that the Danny Rand's character is necessarily inherently problematic. I think what's problematic is that you have all these... Basically, you have all these characters that essentially... You know, like basically trying to tell stories that involve basically any culture, but here we'll say like in Asian culture, and then you have a white protagonist, right? Like, I don't think you should literally never do that. But I think the fact that most of the time that's what people have done is a massive problem. And that's good enough reason to not do it for like maybe 10, 20, 50 years, whatever. But
and that's actually kind of a nice counterplay to the discussion we were having before about having the first Asian superhero on the big screen be a martial artist is like, well, because if not, then we continue having the only martial arts property be starring a white guy, and that's also kind of bad. So yeah, like it's I wonder if that was also a factor in the other direction there.
It could be. I mean, I think honestly, just like they were like, okay, we've decided to. I mean, you know what? I don't know exactly what their process is, but somewhere along the line, I think they probably thought, well, we need to have a movie with a black lead. We need to have a movie with a female lead, and maybe let's do a movie with an Asian lead. And like they're like, okay, Black Panther, yeah. Oh, Captain Marvel, cool. And like they didn't have a long list, you know, of characters, and so they went with Shang-Chi for whatever reasons. Maybe just somebody was like sold them on an idea, but I think they decided to do it before they actually had like the story. And the problem is like in the Netflix verse, they decided to go with Danny Rand as part of the Defenders before they like came up with the story, I think, for what Iron Fist was going to be. And like they could have just had Shang-Chi then, you know? And you could have had Danny Rand and Shang-Chi then. And like maybe that would have been better.
I mean, I don't know how much of this was a part of it, but I know Simu Liu has been pushing for them to do Shang-Chi since like 2014 is when he first started tweeting about it. So like that could also be a big part of it. But yeah, it just made me happy to see, like, this is more about the movie making than the ethics, but I do wish they'd kind of clarified a little more, because I certainly walked out of the movie not sure if that was supposed to be Kunlun, just in a different iteration, and then I was like, so where does this fall in the timeline? Okay. And I've certainly heard from a lot of other people who are similarly confused, or wondering like, why do all these places exist? Are they just copying the story? But yeah, I in some ways I think it would have been nice to tell a different version of the story, but I did think it was kind of a nice, like, yeah, there's some good parts about Iron Fist, but some parts we could have done better, and if we're doing a martial arts movie, we want to at least reference that a little bit.
Yeah, I guess that just didn't really register for me, and I can see the parallels, but like it didn't really have any meaning to me. Maybe if it does to some people, that's cool. Yeah.
So what about for you? Any other kind of last thoughts to wrap this up?
I should have like something coherent, right? I really enjoyed the movie. I'm very glad it exists. I wish it was available online right now, because you know, I do think fewer people going to the theaters would be better, but people who aren't able to go to the theaters being able to go to the theaters, being able to see a movie, I think would be just like a pure positive. I understand the movie business has some issues. I think a lot of that's like capitalism, and like that's a whole thing. You know, but I really do hope this movie does well. It looks like it's going to. I'm glad about that.
Yeah.
I'm like, one thing I'd say is that this movie did something that I hope there's more movies that do things like it. But it felt to me like a outstanding solo film, one of my favorites, that clearly existed within the MCU, but was its own story. And that made sense that it was own story. It wasn't like, oh, why didn't you call so-and-so? It was like, no, this makes sense. And it was like, so like to some extent, it feels like it's almost like too late to have to do certain things that you didn't do back in the day. But this kind of showed, I feel like that's not true. You can still do a solo film for any given person, and it can make sense, and it can be awesome, and it can provide representation to a lot of people who, you know, maybe have not had such.
Yeah, I think that's super important, and I like that they... We've often talked about other movies or TV shows where we're like, but wait, why isn't Spider-Man helping the Defenders? Yeah. He protects New York, like, or whatever it is. And I like that they did that, you know, that they told the story in a way where it made sense that, like, you know, Falcon or Bucky or no one else was getting involved in this story, the way it was playing out, because they mostly didn't know about it. And I do think with the history thing, they have a little bit of a problem in that White Wolf is a role-playing game system that Paul and I have both been very involved in, and we've both made the joke of, like, they've introduced so many shadowy secret organizations that have been in charge of everything, and there's a little bit of, like, if the Mandarin, like, or if Wenwu, the joke about him being the Mandarin is fantastic, which also, by the way, check out the Hail to the King short, because it goes more into that in a way I love. We haven't even talked about how awesome the character of Travis Slattery was in this, but that's more a movie review part. But there is a point, like, they talked about how he conquered the world. There was nothing more he could do. And, like, we now have a number of groups in the MCU that apparently have had massive influence for the last thousands and thousands of years. And I'm kind of like, how are you all, like, bumping up into each other? Or what's going on there? But putting that small little detail aside, I think you're right. They did a great thing. And this is more movie review than ethics, but I'll just kind of make the quick dig, because anyone who listens to my What If episode knows how I feel about this. I'm so glad that this had nothing to do with the multiverse. Oh, yes. And I think this movie may get even better for me, because I think it's going to be the last major Marvel property that isn't fundamentally about the madness of multiverses that we get for a while. And maybe Doctor Strange is going to be a much better movie than I think. I'm not excited about that right now. I've hated the way it's been handled up till now. So I was really glad that... I was kind of worried that movie would have some of it. I know with all the production schedules and stuff, it makes sense that it didn't. But it was just one more thing I loved about the movie. It was a straightforward story told in a larger universe that didn't have reality bending and all this kind of stuff and timelines. It was just a story.
Yeah, it stands on its own. And I really appreciate that. Just like as a movie, I've really been craving that in general. Yeah. And then also, like, when you do representation, like, it's nice when that gets to stand on its own. You know, I think it made sense that they set Captain Marvel in the past, you know, and Black Panther takes place in Wakanda primarily, or like here and there, you know, but I think you want to let something stand on its own before you then bring everything together. So it's like doing a, you know, phase one again. That's not all white people.
I mean, like, I remember hearing from a number of women who were like, I don't generally like Marvel movies, but I went to Captain Marvel and I loved it. And I can imagine with this, like, you may have certainly a bunch of people who are like, I want to see a hero who looks like me or has had my experiences on screen. I was always one of people who are like, I hate Marvel, but I love martial arts movies, so I'll go see this. So, it being a movie that you didn't have to do homework for, you know, you could just watch the movie having never seen another MCU property and be a little confused in the middle of the credits, but otherwise, you know, totally get the movie. And that's I just think that using the end credits then as a way to kind of draw the connections, I thought was also really smart for that reason.
Yeah, for sure. Because it's like, okay, so by the way, this character is now a big deal in the MCU. All these things are connected. Bye-bye. You know? But like, if you watch the movie and stop before the end credits, like, you'd be fine. And I will push back a little bit specifically on the 10 rings. I totally hear what you're saying about having 1,001, you know, secret organizations, but they have actually shown up throughout the, you know, the MCU. And so I feel like this actually kind of ties that all together. And so you get this, like, I think really good combination of, like, you know, deep continuity, but not continuity that you really need to know about to enjoy the movie. And similarly, like, if you speak Mandarin, there are things about the movie you're going to appreciate that you won't if you don't. Like, I only speak a little. Well, I understand a little. I don't really speak it to anyone. But there's just one line that I just want to give the kind of translation that's not the translation given, where when he goes into the village and he's like, step aside, I've lived, what do you say, like 10 of your lifetimes or something. The actual Mandarin the literal translation, I think, is like, I've eaten more years than you've eaten meals.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Like, I've lived more years than you've eaten meals, and it's like, I think there's a lot of like poetry in the language, and there's a lot of little kind of like in-jokes that you'll get that I didn't get. I read about them and I understood maybe half of the words in Mandarin, but like not half the sentences. But like that's another reason I want it on streaming, because I just want to run scenes on repeat and be like, yeah, this is how I'm going to learn a language. Like,
that makes a lot of sense. I mean, and I think that's a great point. It's funny because I've been rewatching Star Trek, and just last night I watched a Star Trek episode that a lot of it was about how like you can do word for word translation, but often idioms won't translate well. And I think that's a great example of one where like I feel like if you used that particular phrase as just the English thing that he said, it would just kind of come off weird, because it's so the phrase, but like knowing that that's the actual words he spoke, because that's an idiom that like makes a lot more sense in that context. I love knowing about, and that'd be fun, like to watch it, like if subtitles had that in or something like that.
I'm not even sure that one is actually an idiom or if it's just kind of a poetic way of speaking, but there are definitely idioms throughout. Right. And when you mentioned Star Trek, I was like, oh, are you learning Klingon? You can learn it on Duolingo.
No, yeah. And that's a better way of saying it. Yeah, it's not as much that's an idiom, but like, and maybe this is from stereotypes, like I think that sort of poetry of language is something I often associate with translated Chinese. In that, I think it's a better way to say it than an idiom.
Yeah.
So, all right. Well, thank you so much for...
I just want to say, I wasn't saying that there aren't idioms, and there's actually a whole thing of like 4 character idioms or whatever. Like, that's a whole thing. I just meant that in that very specific instance, I don't think that was literally an idiom, but that is everything you're saying is true in a general sense. Absolutely.
Right. Definitely. All right. Well, Paul, thank you so much for being a part of this. I'm so glad you could do this. I know you didn't do it for me, but like, I know whether or not you were going to watch the movie was a real thing. We were talking a lot about like, should we just wait 6 weeks to cover it? So I'm very glad you got to be a part of it. Thank you so much for giving us 2 hours of your day when I know your family's got so much going on. My sense is that you kind of put a pause on your content creation, but for people who want to see stuff you've created in the past and know where you're going to create stuff in the future, where should they check it out?
Yeah, just Zen Madman on Twitter and Twitch. You can follow me, and when I do stuff, it'll be there.
So, Paul, thank you so much. And also, he's not here, but I really want to thank Will Freeland. Will and Steve Soderman are both part of the Hype is My Superpower podcast. They're both awesome podcasters. I'm not a comic book reader. They make me understand comic books on their podcast. They're really great. If you just listen to my What If episode, the one that came out just before this one, they were both guests on that. So Will isn't here, unfortunately, but please check out Hype is My Superpower. It's another great podcast. And for those who, if you're checking this out for the first time, thank you so much for being a part of this. As I said, would love to get a 5-star review on iTunes specifically is the way to do it. Although, even if you aren't in love with the show but have some helpful feedback, give us a 4-star review, even a 1-star review. Sometimes we can learn from. If you utterly hate the show and just want to tell me how terrible I am, maybe just unsubscribe if this isn't for you. But like, if you got some helpful feedback, how we can improve things, we'd love to know it. And of course, if you have feedback, what'd you say?
I just want to say, don't give a 1-star review. Just stop listening. Just listen to something else. There's so much stuff.
Also true. Yeah, I don't love. I just want to tell people, like, I don't want to, be. You can only tell me good things about my show.
Yeah. Negative feedback is great. Constructive negative feedback. But like when you don't like something, just find something else.
Yeah, exactly. But I would love to hear your thoughts on our discussion here, especially from, if this movie really meant a lot to you because of representation or something else, if you got some thoughts about what we have had to say, if you're someone who, like, the movie really kind of made you think about new things in different ways, or what we had to say, or you think we're totally wrong, let us know. You can write into us at theethicalpanda@gmail.com. You can also find me on Facebook or Twitter at The Ethical Panda. And of course, you can go to the website, theethicalpanda.com. There you'll find all my podcasts about this podcast, about my Star Wars podcast. I can now announce that I'm actually now on a new podcast, the Marvel Movie Minute podcast, which is doing this awesome minute-by-minute review of a particular Marvel movie. I'm one of the co-hosts for their coverage of Thor. So if you subscribe to the Marvel Movie Minute, those will start coming out. Next week, we're going to release one of our primer episodes, which is with one of the original pandas, Jeff Randall, in which we're talking with him about the comic book origins of the character of Thor. It's a really fun episode. It's like most of the episodes are like 15, 20 minutes, just kind of diving into one particular moment. We go a lot into the movie making techniques, a lot into, like, we're going to have like people with PhDs in like Shakespearean studies and people who know all about Norse mythology and like all these different ways to talk about what might seem like a kind of lighthearted, fun movie. Nope, we are going to spend 213 episodes. No, I'm terrible with math. 126 episodes, whatever is like 2 hours plus about 13 minutes going into it. Don't listen to this if you want a math podcast. That's not the thing here. But yes, definitely check that out.
I'm sitting here doing the math.
Yeah, there you go. Please check out my other podcasts. Please check out all the great podcasts on the Stranded Panda Network. The MCU cast has done their own great coverage of Shang-Chi. Definitely worth checking out. And the most important thing, watch those shows, listen to those movies, write the reviews, do the things, but most importantly, have a good day.